What is going on, guys? It's Muta here, back with another video, and this time we are going over a insane Valby build that I've been working on. Let's not waste any time at all and get right into it. And just as a quick overview of the supply moisture mod, for those who don't know, it basically increases your crit rate on your abilities, your crit rate on your weapons, increases your skill duration, and increases your attribute trigger rate whenever you are standing on Valby's water. So any of her abilities that put water on the ground, if you are standing in them, you will get these bonuses. And I will get in details of that when we go over the actual mods. Now, before I go over the actual modules, there is some important mechanics with Valby that you guys need to know. So I'm going to show you guys those now. So kind of like you saw in that intro clip, this is a super important mechanic that Valby has, and it is that her dots stack on top of each other. So if I use my V here and go through the enemy, you can see my dots ticking. If I do it again, however, you can now see more dots ticking. How about if I do it again? Well, look at that. There's even more. We'll do it again. So you can see kind of where this is going. These dots stack on each other, so that means we're going to want a lot of cooldown and a lot of duration, at least for our mobbing setup specifically. So that is by far the most important mechanic that you need to know about Valby. Her dots stack on top of each other. Now, the next thing I'm going to show you is less of a mechanic and more of what I think is a bug, but you should know this because it's very important when you're actually doing your ability usage with Valby. I am using supply moisture, which makes my crit go up by a lot on my skill crit. So right now it's 12% here. I'll show you guys what it is when I have supply moisture active, and here you can see it's now 62%, so it goes up quite a bit. Now, the reason I'm showing you guys this is because this is a bit confusing in how this works, but see that I'm sitting on 12% crit rate right now. And now if I use my V, I'm going to go through these enemies here. We're going to look at the crits, and you can see I'm not critting a lot at all. And if we check my stat page, it says 62%. But you can clearly tell that I am not critting at a 62% rate. I'm critting at a 12% rate. So I think this is a bug, but I'm going to show you guys how to work around it to make sure you're not making the mistake of not knowing that your crit isn't actually enhanced when you're using the ability at certain times. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to put a C, use my 2 below me. You can see 62%. Now what I'm going to do is use my V from the water here. And would you look at that, we have our 62% crit rate. And if I step out of the water, again, it is still proccing at 62%. You can see that here. Now the last test I'm going to show you is going from a V into a V, because a lot of people just kind of go V into V into V. So I'm going to do that here. And we can see what the crit rate looks like. So again, pretty low right now. Now let's put a second dot on them. So you can see that the second dot is now proccing for the 62%, but that first dot is still going at the 12%. I think I'm bugged because I actually have infinite V here, but so unfortunately I did have to reset myself there, but we're all good now. Now there's one last thing I want to show you, because we did just see that that second V was working just fine. However, there is a mistake that you will probably make while doing this if you're just kind of mindlessly being around. So let me show you that, because it is also going to mess with your crit. First V, and then you'll see I step out briefly, right? So now I'm running through with my second, and you can see that we're getting that really low crit rate on both of those stacks. So again, guys, if you are leading with your V like this, your first stack is not going to have the increased crit rate, but if you use your second one from inside the first one, so you need to stop and then start it, you will get the increased crit rate. Now, my recommendation to just always make sure that you're getting the extra crit rate is every couple times you V, just throw your C down and V out of that. Then you can deactivate it, pop another one, go through, stop, pop another one. And eventually you'll get used to this, but you just have to make sure you stop before using it again. So very important mechanic. Now there's two final mechanics I'm going to show you here, and these, one applies to intercept bosses and one applies to all mobs, but I'm going to show you guys that with the Devourer here. First one is I'm going to put a cooldown before he spawns here. and you can notice there is absolutely no dot on him. So I only noticed this with intercept bosses, but if you use an ability before they spawn, it is not going to put the dot on them. So just a little something to be aware of. The other mechanic I want to show you, and this applies to all bosses, is I am going to now put a dot on him. You can see our dot is on him. I'm going to lead him out of the water as best I can here. You can see he is well out of the water here. The water's way over there, and he is still taking dot damage. So despite what the ability says, which is enemies standing in the waterway take continuous damage and are inflicted with laundry, that description is not accurate. The dot stays on them even when they walk out of it. Anyways, that is it for mechanics, guys. There may be other hidden stuff, but this is everything that I found while testing the build so far, and a lot of this stuff is going to play into the actual builds that I'm going to be showing you guys today, so just keep these things in mind. Now first, I'm going to go over the mobbing setup. And that is because this build is much better for mobbing than bossing. Now there is ways to build this for bossing, and I'm going to show you guys that because there's some pretty cool ways you can do it. But I would say on a bossing level, this build compares closely to like a high voltage bunny build in terms of efficiency. Now the mobbing side of it is insane, S tier. It is crazy strong, super fun to use. So I'm going to show you the mobbing stuff first because that is the primary role for using this, and then I will show you guys the bossing stuff. So let's get into the mobbing build. So first off, of course, we have the supply moisture mod. Now this works on both Valby and Ultimate Valby, so you can use this on either one. This is a older mod. It is absolutely her best mod right now. I've seen others who have tested the new mods, and I've also tested the old mods. And there's just nothing that is on the same level on Valby as Supply Moisture currently. Now, like I said before, this is going to be increasing our attribute trigger rate, our firearm critical hit, our skill critical hit, and our skill duration. Now it does get rid of our mana passive, which reduces our mana consumption, but don't worry about that. You won't have mana issues with this mobbing setup, I promise. Now first I'm going to cover our basic damage mods, and what we're going to go with here is focus on dimension and focus on non-attribute. Now these aren't the highest damage of all the mods, but they are very close, and the benefit here is that we're getting the extra 12% skill cooldown, which is absolutely huge on Valby. It lets us use our abilities a lot more and just cover a lot more range. So definitely want to settle on these. Take these. I would not substitute them for anything else. Now next I'm going to go into the crit mods, and you may be wondering, why is there only 2 crit mods? Isn't there 4? And you would be correct about that. Now the thing with this build is, because of supply moisture, we actually get a ton of crit rate, and it does scale really well with additional crit rate from our mods. However, stacking 4 crit mods really limits our options, and it also makes it so we aren't going to be able to have really short cooldowns, which is super important with Valby. So you definitely want to take the 2 blue crit mods. These are better than the purple ones, just numbers wise. They give you more stats. We definitely want to take advantage of the extra crit that supply moisture gives us, but we also don't want to sacrifice all of our cooldowns. So it's kind of a balancing act here, and this setup gives us a ton of flexibility as well, which I will show you guys. But you do want to make sure you take these 2 crit mods, skill insight and skill concentration. Now next we're going to look at the kind of utility mods here. So first, the cooldown mods. I take nimble fingers here, so obviously just flat cooldown is great for Valby. It's going to let us spam our abilities more and put dots all over the place. And MP conversion as well. Now this is going to be offset by our yellow mod, which I'll get into in a sec here, but this gives an insane amount of cooldown. You definitely want this. Now there are substitutes you can use depending on certain situations if you don't want to lose that mana, but in general you want to make sure you're using MP conversion for the mobbing setup. And the way we get around that MP loss as well as the MP consumption loss from our transcendent mod is that we're going to use MP collector. As Valby, you're pretty much hitting everything all over the place. You're going to get a ton of MP back with this. You will never have MP problems if you are doing mobbing content with the mobbing build here. So definitely take this. It will let you spam your abilities all over the place and cover every inch of the map with a million dots. It is super fun. Now last, we're going to take skill extension and skill expansion. Now skill expansion is obviously to make our abilities cover a wider range. Valby's abilities now do go up to 250% extra range, but I've found that just having skill expansion is enough to do everything. It gives you tons of range on your abilities. And of course, I will show you guys some alternates if you want some extra range, but again, this should cover everything that you need. Obviously, skill extension is just a great bond to have. It gives us duration on everything, which just means more dots on the ground for longer. And our V, which we travel around at Mach speed and cover everything, lasts longer as well. Now, what you take here, obviously, is whatever preference you have. I find that long distance maneuvering is just overall my favorite. But again, you can take whatever you want here. But let me show you guys this with all these mods, how amazing these cooldowns are. So this is going to be your main ability that's covering most ground here. And you can see that the stack cooldown right now is 5.7 seconds. We stay in the liquefied form for 7.3 seconds, which means we can basically be liquefied permanently, and liquefied means like when you're floating above the ground moving fast. And then our actual waterway dot lasts for 22 seconds here. It is ridiculous. So you can, again, like the mechanic I showed you, you can stack it up multiple times on one target, however you want to do it. Maybe you want to cover a wide range of areas, so you're just kind of moving it all over the place, or you're going over the same spot over and over to do a million dots on one target. Whatever you want to do, this will let you do it. Our C is on a 6.4 second, Bubble Bullet is on a 2.6 second, and then our ult is on a 7.7. Now, generally, when I'm using this build, I'm only using these three abilities primarily. I don't really ever use the ultimate. I just don't think it's that great, and it doesn't really synchronize well with this build. Now, like I said, this build is incredibly flexible. There's so many mod options that you can make here. Just as an example, let's say you want more range. We could drop our skill duration and throw on amplification control for that 50% extra range, which basically will cap us out. And now we pretty much have max range on our abilities. So again, if you want the extra range and you want to drop some duration for whatever reason, you could totally do that. Or let's say you want a little bit of extra health for whatever reason. Well, we have something like time distribution. Boom, right there. We can throw that in for nimble fingers or for MP conversion and get that extra health and still keep some of our cooldown. If you want, I don't know, more defense, you've got agony. I mean, there's a million options here, guys. You can mix and match so many different things. It's so much fun to experiment with, but I would start off with the kind of base that I showed you guys, and then you can experiment from there. But this is kind of what I found as being the most consistent, was with this setup right here. Now, you could also go with the setup where maybe you want to just completely maximize your damage and you're not too worried about cooldowns, just enough to kind of drive by and kill all the enemies. Then you could swap things in like dangerous ambush here. You could swap in spear and shield here somewhere. I think you guys get the idea though. Now for my reactor right now, I am running a skill hit crit rate and skill hit crit damage because these scale really well with the supply moisture transcendent mod. And this is just one I had sitting around that I had saved. Luckily, it is a Thunder Cage one. I am kind of trying to transition to using the Enduring Legacy on Valby because that gun is just insane right now and also has really high crit stats like the Thunder Cage. Now, unless you're using the Python, you definitely want to use a high crit rate weapon with this build, and that is because of how it scales the crit on your gun to insane amounts. So my Enduring Legacy, I think, sits at like a 78% crit rate or 70 or something like that when I'm standing in water. Now, as for your substats, there's honestly, again, a lot of flexible options here. Because this is primarily for mobbing, you could go with what I have here, which is just to scale the crit. I think this combination is the absolute best in terms of just raw damage on this. But some other viable options could be if you want more duration or you want even shorter cooldowns, those would also be good. If you want more range on your abilities, that could also be good. And then also non-attribute and dimension damage could also be good, although I do prefer crit. I found that it is hitting harder overall. But again, there's just so many combinations that work with this build. It's one of the most flexible builds and it's incredibly fun to use. And you can experiment with it. Just try to get a reactor with the weapon of your choice, and then try to get at least 2 stat rolls that are, you know, obviously useful and in the gold roll range if you can get them. Now for components, I would definitely recommend Slayer. I know you guys see Slayer a lot. This is kind of hard to farm. You have to get it from Pyromaniac, but it's 100% worth getting. The set is just super insane, and With this mobbing setup, you have pretty much infinite mana, so the skill cost increase doesn't really matter, and it does raise your damage by quite a lot. And then also it gives you more rounds in your gun, which is also really nice. So I'll quickly just kind of go through what my Slayer set looks like right now. You obviously want max mana on this. And MP recovery in combat is, you know, it's whatever. For this, I just went with a high defense roll. This one on this build is not super important, but you definitely want to get HP here. And then MP out of combat is also really good if you want that. I haven't been having mana issues so much, so I haven't really been using that, but that's also a good roll on your auxiliary power. And then you definitely want to have max mana on this, and then everything else is kind of just small convenience things. And real quick, just in case anyone did want to see it, this is the Thunder Cage I'm using right now. It's kind of just a general use everything Thunder Cage, but I primarily use it for mobbing, so it's great for my Valby here. I do want to work into using the Enduring Legacy. I'm almost done with building that, and then I will have a build guide out for you guys on that, so I don't want to show it quite yet because it's not done, but that will be done soon, and then I'll probably be swapping over to that, assuming I can get a good reactor. Now for the mobbing setup, I'll show you guys a couple clips here. This is from a Spec Ops mission, one of the like Void Experiment ones. And these are pretty much like the tankiest mobs in the game, besides bosses obviously. They're super tanky and super annoying. And you can see that this build just completely melts all this stuff. So I wanted to kind of test it against the tanky mobbing mobs. So the non-boss mobs, and it still just absolutely rips through them. I think at the end of this mission I had like 300 million damage, something like that. So it was pretty ridiculous. It was just completely tearing them apart, and the amount of area that I was able to cover with this build was just ridiculous. And then here I'm showing you a clip from the Fortress Defense Spec Ops mission. And you can see here basically I am covering a ridiculous amount of area. So I'm just doing circles around the entire map pretty much, and because of the duration and the cooldown, it's just taking mobs out all over the place and covering pretty much the whole vicinity around the thing. So again, this build is just super fun to use and super strong. Alright guys, and now I'm going to talk about the bossing side of this build. Now again, Valby isn't the best bossing character in the world. I would put her around the same tier as Bunny, but you can make her work very well still, and you can make her extremely durable and just fun to use. I found some cool setups here. So I'm going to show you two setups for bossing. One is going to be a more gun focused setup, and that is utilizing supply moisture to increase your gun's critical hit rate. The other build I'm going to show you is a bit of a niche one, but I found that it does still work in a lot of situations, and it's just kind of fun to use. And that is going to be a more ability dot focus build for bossing. So I'm going to show you both of those, but we're going to go through the gun one first here. Now I know this looks crazy right now, but stay with me. I'm going to explain everything that you're looking at here. I promise you guys this build is really good for bossing. So again, our focus here is our gun, so we're not really worried about ability damage. Now what we are worried about is having water all over the place at all times, so that we're getting that extra crit rate no matter what without having to worry about it too much. And also focused around being extremely durable so that you can fight whatever boss without worrying about taking a ton of damage. The build is super durable. But anyways, let's get into the mods. So again, we are using supply moisture and long distance maneuvering. Instead of battle stamina, we're now going to be using stim accelerant. So we're just getting a ton of HP. Again, mana isn't going to be too much of an issue here. We aren't really spamming our abilities or anything like that. We're just using them to set up for our crit rate for our gun. And you'll be able to find mana all over the ground from ads and stuff if you ever need it, but you should not run out. Now, if for whatever reason you are having mana issues, you can just go ahead and slot increased HP there instead of stim accelerant. Now, we still are running our skill extension as well as our skill expansion, and these mods are basically to keep uptime on all our AoE water abilities so that we have more time to stand in them and they're just around longer, so we have more places to stand to keep our weapon crit rate up. Now if you really want to be like extra tanky, you could replace one of these with like increased defense or something. I don't think you'll really need that for anything. Maybe the new gluttony boss, I don't know. I would typically stick to using these two. Now instead of MP conversion, I've swapped that out for agony. This just gives us more MP, so we have more MP to use our abilities and keep crit rate up. And then it also gives us a little defense boost, which is always really nice. And then, of course, we're still using Nimble Fingers. We do want to have some sort of cooldown to help us keep our abilities up. Now, you can see I completely dropped the damage mods here, and that's because we're not looking to get any damage out of our abilities. Our abilities are simply there so that we can get the extra crit rate on our gun by standing in the water. So we've replaced those. First, I put time distribution here. You still get some cooldown back, but you also get that extra HP, so you're just going to be more durable. And then also maximize conservation so that everything is just costing us less to cast. So you should just never really have too many mana problems, and you should be able to keep 100% uptime on your crit rate, because you should be able to just spam your abilities all over the place and have water everywhere that you need it. Now, I replaced one crit mod here with, I'm not even going to try to pronounce this, but the reason for that is just the crit hit resist. Now, I am not too familiar with what does crit and what doesn't, but I assume that Colossi probably have some sort of crits in their attacks. So I went with this one. If you guys know something better, feel free to replace this, but I do believe this will make you more durable in those fights. And then this last spot is a flex spot. So whatever boss you're fighting, you can put in their resistance here, and you'll get immunity to their damage over time effect. You can increase these if you want for even more resistance, but just having that immunity effect is really nice for bossing. So all these mods together make an extremely durable build that also lets you keep your crit rate on your gun up at pretty much all times with very minimal effort. So if you want to use a more gun focused build for bossing on Valby, then I would go with this. Now I actually don't have a reactor specifically for this. However, it doesn't really matter what your reactor is or what weapon it's matching, because this entire build is just about your firearm damage. So if you have some random reactor out there with like gold duration or something like that, you could just use that, or one with like extra range on it or skill cost. You basically just want to make sure that you have uptime on your abilities at all times and maintaining that firearm crit rate. Now for the component set, I would go with the Annihilation set because we are more firearm focused here. Now it does reduce your MP recovery a little bit, but just naturally fighting bosses, you're going to be taking damage. It also gives you some skill duration, so you're going to get skill duration and you'll get extra firearm damage whenever you take damage. So I'll go through quickly and just show you guys what I have here. Again, you definitely want to try to get max MP here and HP here and defense here, and then everything else is just kind of a bonus. And then again, for your gun, go with something with high crit rate that's going to scale well with the Transcendent mod, Thunder Cage. During Legacy, we have Secret Garden now. I think Greg's Reverse Fate has really good crit on it, so look for a nice crit weapon that you like and stick with that. And I'll give you guys a quick example of this build in action. Now again, it's not going to melt a boss like a Lepic or Glay. Again, I'd put it similarly to like a bunny build, but you'll see kind of the durability here and just how much you're actually critting with this thing. Use your Q to kind of make a little pathway for you. Keep that crit going. Anyways, I think you guys get the idea of this build, so let's move on to the next one. Alright, now let's go over the other bossing setup. Now this is an ability based one. It's going to be a lot squishier than the gun setup, and the idea around this one is basically to spam a bunch of dots on the boss that are going to stack up and stack up and stack up till it's just melting away. Now the weak point of this build currently is that it can run out of mana pretty easily. However, if you have a Luna friend and you run this build, I think you can do some pretty illegal things. Now I haven't gotten to test this yet, but because of how the dots stack, running this build with a Luna might yield you some pretty crazy results, but I'll let you guys test that out. But anyways, let's go over this build and then I'll show you an example of how it's used. So again, we're going to start just with our damage mods. We got the focus on dimension and focus on non-attribute. And we have skill concentration and skill insight. Now we are still running skill extension for duration, but we actually have dropped the skill expansion, and that is because we are not worried about covering a lot of area here. We are spamming abilities on top of the boss to stack up dots, so we're going to be sitting in the water anyways, so we're maximizing duration here. With MP Accelerant, you also get some extra MP, so that's great. And we're going to keep nimble fingers as well as MP conversion, because it is important that we have low cooldown so that we can stack up those dots as fast as possible. And then we have Battle of Stamina for that extra dot duration and a little bit of survivability. And then lastly, we're taking Dangerous Ambush. This is for the extra damage, the best in slot for this particular polarity when it comes to bossing. You definitely want to take this, and you're not really going to get any benefit out of MP Collector. So again, this build is pretty niche, but you can definitely make it work. And kind of the play loop is go in, spam your mana and stack dots on the boss, and then kind of get out and get your mana out of combat regen, get your mana bar back, and then go back and do it again. It is complete polar opposites of the gun setup, so whichever one you guys prefer, I would just go with that. And then obviously you can fine tune it how you want because of how flexible this build is with these polarities. Now for my reactor, I actually have a Python one, and I'll explain that in a sec, but we have skill cooldown and Colossus damage so that the dot is doing more damage and I can spam it a little bit quicker. Now the reason I have the Python one again is because of passive here, which lets us basically reduce the boss's non-attribute resistance. So after I use all my mana bar up, I start shooting the boss's weak points so that my dots that are ticking on them start doing more damage. Now you could just go with a regular crit weapon. I just had fun doing the Python thing, making the dots tick harder. Again, you could just run a normal gun and probably do just the same, if not more, but that's why I was using the Python for this. You can pretty much roll whatever's useful on here, so any sort of damage types for your abilities. You know, obviously you want Colossus damage if you can get that. That's going to scale the absolute best. And then crit would be the next thing. So I would suggest a skill crit Colossus reactor as the absolute best in slot for this, but there's a lot of viable options here. And then of course, again, we're going to use the Slayer set for this. Now, I did try with and without the Slayer set to see if the skill cost was worth it. It is 100% worth it. It makes it do a lot more damage and bosses go quicker, so definitely use the Slayer set if you have a good one. And again, I'm just using the same one that I showed earlier for mobbing. And real quick, here's an example of using this build on the Devourer. It ends up being a 32-second kill. Again, the Python probably isn't the most optimal thing here, but you can see that the dots are building up over time and start burning a lot of damage. I also tried it on some of the other bosses and it's completely viable, but you're definitely going to get those immunity phases most of the time, and that's kind of when you want to go and reset your mana bar and then come back and do it again. But yeah, guys, that is it. I had so much fun building this and theory crafting with it. I wanted to make a build that was really flexible because Valby is definitely more of a mobbing character, and I feel like you get more flexibility overall with that. But I also wanted it to still be viable for bossing, so the two builds that I showed you are very viable, and I hope that you guys find success with them. So let me know if you do use it and how your bossing goes with those. For me personally, I'll be using the gun side of the bossing setup just because I like the durability and I just like shooting at things, and I think it just feels overall safer. But the dot setup is also a fun build to use as well. Anyways, that is it for this video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Enduring Legacy video coming very soon, so stay tuned for that. I'm almost done with it finally. As always, thank you guys so much for the overwhelming support. I really love doing these videos. I hope you enjoyed. Thank you so much as always, and I will catch you in the next one. Oh, and by the way, if you want to know how my Valby looks all shiny, if yours isn't looking like that when you're using shiny dyes, come into the settings here, go to graphics, turn your reflections down to low, and you'll be good to go.